Checkmate in 3 moves, the boy whispered, and that's when the entire room went silent. No one had paid much attention when 10-year-old Malik first sat down at the chessboard. After all, who'd expect anything from the black maid's son in a room full of millionaires? If they noticed him at all, it was as a curiosity, a tiny shadow trailing behind his mother's apron, carrying a battered old book with corners frayed from too much love and too little money. It all began at the sprawling mansion of Eleanor Grant, a real estate mogul whose name was etched in brass on half the new luxury condos downtown. Eleanor loved 2 things more than anything else: reminding people she was rich and pretending to be generous about it. So every year, she threw her charity brunch, an invite-only affair where the city's elite wore linen suits and pastel hats, swirling champagne and praising each other for the same donations they'd brag about to the press later. Outside, her gardens bloomed with roses carefully pruned by hands that would never be thanked. Inside, the staff, invisible but indispensable, darted through marble halls like bees too busy to sting. Servers glided past with silver trays stacked with hors d'oeuvres the staff could never afford to taste. The kitchen clanged with the orchestra of wealth. Sizzling pans, popping corks, murmured orders spoken in the clipped tone of those who never heard no. Among that hidden army was Olivia. She'd worked for Eleanor for 6 years, long enough to know exactly how to move through that house without taking up space. She wore her plain black uniform with quiet pride, shoes polished until they shone like a mirror she couldn't afford for her own apartment. She was the kind of woman you'd thank once at Christmas and forget by New Year's. She taught herself to be invisible for her son, because there was always Malik, waiting for her after her double shifts, eyes wide and heart bigger than anything she could hold. He was the reason she never complained when Eleanor snapped her fingers like a queen. He was the reason she never let herself look in the grand mirrors for too long, because she was too busy counting pennies for bus fare, school shoes, and the second-hand chess manual that had become Malik's most precious treasure. Most days, Malik stayed tucked away in the small side room near the kitchen, his favorite spot when Olivia couldn't leave him with a neighbor. He'd curl up in a battered armchair with a chessboard balanced on his knees. Sometimes he'd hum softly while sliding the pawns across the board, playing both sides, because at least on the board, the pieces were equal, no matter what the world said about him. But that afternoon was different. Malik slipped away from the cramped back room. The chatter and laughter drifted toward him like a siren song. Fancy words, rich laughs that carried so far they seemed to fill the walls. The smell of sweet pastries and roast beef made his stomach ache in that way he'd learned to ignore. He wandered, careful not to scuff the polished floor, until he found himself at the open door of Eleanor's study. Inside, the guests had drifted in for brandy and bragging rights. And there it was, the giant marble chessboard that Eleanor kept under a glass dome like a crown jewel. Malik's eyes widened at the gleaming pieces, each carved from ivory and onyx. To him, it looked like magic. The same game he'd played 1,000 times, but on a stage so big it made his heart race. He didn't touch it, of course. He knew better than that. But he couldn't stop staring. It was Eleanor who spotted him first. She stood by the fireplace, one hand draped around the stem of her wine glass, the other resting lightly on the shoulder of a stockbroker who was telling some story about his new yacht. Her eyes flicked from Malik's 2 big shoes to the tiny, worn manual clutched in his brown hand. And then she smiled, that smile that never reached her eyes. "Oh, look," she drawled, her voice rising just enough to pull the room's attention with it. "Isn't he adorable? Olivia." She snapped her fingers like she was calling for a puppy. "Darling, come here. Is that your boy lurking in the hallway?" Olivia nearly dropped the silver tray she was carrying. She forced her feet forward, each step echoing off the marble floors like an accusation. She knew that tone. She knew that smile. This wasn't a real invitation, it was a joke. Something Eleanor would tell her tennis friends later. How the maid's son thought he could play with the grown-ups. "Yes, ma'am," Olivia murmured, her voice small enough to hide the tremor in her chest. She gently nudged Malik forward, smoothing his collar as if that could protect him from what she knew was coming. Eleanor clapped her hands like a child at a circus. "Bring him in. Let's see if our little chess master wants to play with the big boys." She winked at her guests, who chuckled behind raised glasses. A tall man with a waxed mustache leaned down toward Malik, his grin wolfish. You know how to play, champ? These pieces are worth more than my first car. Another woman faked a sweet laugh. Just don't break anything, darling. Maybe you'll bring us good luck. Malik's fingers tightened around his chess manual. The room's laughter swirled around him, prickly and sharp. He looked at his mother, his anchor. Olivia crouched so their eyes were level, her hand brushing his cheek. You don't have to, baby, she whispered. Say no and we'll go back to the kitchen. I'll make you a sandwich, okay? But Malik's eyes flicked to the chessboard again. He'd played the game 1,000 times, but never on a set like this. Never in a room like this. He thought of his grandfather's words. The board is equal for everyone. He swallowed the lump at his throat, squeezed his mother's hand, and gave a tiny nod. Olivia wanted to pull him back, to keep him safe in the shadows, where they couldn't laugh at him. But she didn't. She stood tall, chin lifted just enough for Eleanor to notice. She didn't say thank you. Didn't say how kind. She just stepped back, her eyes locked on her son. Malik climbed into the velvet chair that nearly swallowed him whole. His feet didn't reach the floor, but his fingers moved with a quiet confidence as he picked up the pieces, feeling their cool weight. He placed his battered manual by his elbow like a secret weapon. Across from him, Mr. Porter, a man twice Malik's height and 10 times his ego, cracked his knuckles and let out a booming laugh. Don't worry, champ, I'll go easy on you. Malik looked at him, his voice steady despite the laughter bubbling behind him. Okay, sir, he said softly. Your move. A stout, red-faced man named Mr. Porter, one of Eleanor's wealthiest and loudest guests, decided to humor the boy. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, leaving a smudge of caviar near his lip as he swaggered toward the gleaming marble chessboard. All right, kid, he drawled, voice dripping with false sweetness as he cracked his knuckles. He leaned over the board, his belly pressing into the velvet arm of the chair across from Malik. I'll go easy on you. Let's see if you know the difference between a pawn and a knight. A ripple of laughter rolled through the study like an echo off marble walls. Champagne glasses clinked, their fragile chimes blending with smug whispers. A young man with slick back hair elbowed his date and stage whispered, Poor thing. Probably thinks checkers is the same thing. Eleanor let out a sharp, theatrical giggle that didn't quite reach her eyes. She perched herself on the arm of a nearby chaise lounge, swirling her wine as if this were a private circus she'd paid for. Isn't he adorable? She crooned, loud enough for Olivia to hear. Let's hope he doesn't embarrass himself too badly, him. Olivia stood frozen at the study door, half hidden behind the thick velvet drapes that matched Eleanor's living room curtains. Her hands twisted the hem of her apron until the seams felt like they might tear. She'd seen this before, not chess, but the setup, the joke everyone but the target was in on, and she hated it. Her chest tightened with an ache that tasted like metal on her tongue. She wanted to storm in, to scoop up Malik and whisper, It's not worth it. We don't owe them a show. But her son, her quiet, thoughtful Malik, sat so still, his spine straight, his fingers calm as he gently set down his battered old chess manual on the side table. He didn't look at the whispers or the laughter. His eyes locked on the board as if the mocking words bounced right off him. Porter plopped himself into the velvet chair opposite Malik, its expensive upholstery groaning under his weight. With an exaggerated flourish, he lazily began setting up the pieces. He knocked over 2 pawns and smirked when Malik quietly reset them without a word. Porter's ringed fingers fumbled at the black queen, twisting it in the wrong square until Malik gently nudged it into place. Ah, look at that. The boy knows the board better than I do. Porter boomed. Laughter again. Someone snapped a photo on their phone, no doubt planning to caption it later. When the helps kid thinks he's smart. But when the clock finally ticked to start, Malik's face changed, just a shade, but Olivia saw it. The boy who liked to hum to himself while flipping pages suddenly became a strategist, calm, calculating, a whisper of his grandfather's voice echoing in his head. The board is equal for everyone. The first moves were fast. Porter barely glanced down. He swirled his brandy glass with one hand, moved a pawn with the other, half his attention still on a joke about stock options he'd been telling moments before. But within a minute, his half-smirk faltered. He leaned in. The pawns he'd arrogantly marched forward were gone, eaten up, sacrificed for nothing. The bishop he thought safe behind them was now pinned, and Malik's rook glided into place, with a quiet tap Porter could feel in his bones. Hold on. That's illegal," Porter barked, his voice suddenly too loud in the hush that had fallen over the room. "You can't do that, moving sideways like that. I've played chess for 30 years. Malik didn't flinch. He gently tapped the page in his manual, where the move was highlighted in faded pencil marks. "No, sir," he said softly, his eyes never wavering. "That's en passant." A ripple of surprise danced through the circle of guests now pressing closer, their champagne flutes forgotten. Eleanor leaned forward, her smile frozen. The older gentleman in the back, the only one in the room who might have actually played competitively, let out a low whistle. "He's right," the man murmured. "It's textbook. That's the rule." Porter shifted in his chair, his shirt pulling tight across his gut as he leaned forward, eyes darting across the board like he'd lost a map. He moved another piece, trying to mount a sloppy counterattack. Malik didn't even blink. His knight swooped in, clearing a line with a single elegant hop that drew a collective gasp. Now, the guests stopped pretending this was funny. They leaned in, their polite cocktail chatter gone. Olivia could feel the shift, the moment when people stopped laughing at you and started fearing you might show them up. Porter wiped a sheen of sweat from his hairline with his monogrammed handkerchief. His brandy glass sat untouched, the amber liquid trembling with every tremor in his hands. He reached for his queen like a drowning man grabbing at driftwood, but Malik's pawn, that tiny overlooked piece, blocked it off, shutting down the entire right side of the board. "Where did you learn to do this?" Eleanor blurted, trying to pull the attention back to herself, as if she deserved credit for whatever was happening. Malik's eyes flicked up for just a heartbeat, his soft voice carrying to every corner of the study. "My grandfather taught me. He used to say, 'The board is equal for everyone.'" Olivia's breath caught in her throat. She felt that line sink deep into the walls of Eleanor's fancy study. Words so simple they cracked through the marble smugness like a hammer to glass. Porter's moves grew frantic now. He grabbed his queen and swung her back and forth, trying to bait Malik into a mistake. But Malik's eyes tracked every angle like a quiet storm. His rook slid along its file, clean, efficient, boxing Porter's king in a tiny cage. The whispers behind Malik changed tone. No more pity, no more jokes. Now, they were sharp with awe and a sprinkle of fear. "Did you see that fork? He's just a kid. Look at his control." Porter's sweating bullets. "Huh." Porter slammed his piece down so hard a bishop toppled over. He shot a glare at Olivia as if she'd tricked him. "He's cheating. There's no way." But Olivia just stood straighter. She didn't twist her apron anymore. She folded her hands neatly and lifted her chin, watching her son dismantle a man twice his size and 10 times his ego. Eleanor cleared her throat, that thin smile plastered on her lips. But even she couldn't look away from the inevitable end. In that moment, Malik leaned back, thumb brushing the battered cover of his chess manual, his grandfather's words echoing in his mind. Calm, precise, fearless. He set his knight down with a quiet finality that echoed through the silent room. "Checkmate in 3 moves," he whispered, and the laughter that once filled the study died so fast it felt like the air had been sucked from the mansion's gilded halls. 10 minutes later, the funny game was no longer a joke. What had started as a snide distraction for bored millionaires had turned into something none of them could control. A quiet storm that built with every move Malik made. Each soft click of marble on marble was like a drop of water echoing in a cavern, steady, patient, unstoppable. Mr. Porter, who'd once lounged back in the velvet chair like he owned the world, now hunched forward, eyes darting frantically over the board. His white shirt clung to his back in damp patches. He tugged at his collar as if it might choke him. A bead of sweat trickled down his temple, catching on the edge of his expensive hair gel before dripping onto the chessboard. Malik sat perfectly still, his tiny legs dangling inches above the plush carpet. He didn't fidget. He didn't smirk. His eyes tracked every piece with a calm that made the onlookers hold their breath. He looked like a boy in a library, focused, respectful, and yet his moves cut sharper than any insult they'd ever whispered behind his mother's back. The guests, who had circled the table at first for laughs, now pressed closer for a better view. They were no longer whispering jokes about the maid's son. Now they whispered about him, and none of them could look away. "You've got to be cheating," Porter spat suddenly, his voice cracking through the tense hush like a whip. His hands trembled as he wiped his forehead with a silk handkerchief that had once been white and now looked gray with sweat. Olivia flinched from her spot behind the heavy drapes. She knew that tone, the one men like Porter used when they realized they'd underestimated someone they saw as beneath them. Her fingers dug into her apron, but she didn't dare step forward. She'd promised herself she wouldn't get in her son's way now. This was his game. Malik blinked slowly, as if even Porter's anger couldn't reach him inside his bubble of focus. His voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper, but it carried across the room like a church bell. "My mom works hard, sir," Malik said, his eyes still on the board. "She doesn't have time for tricks. My grandfather taught me chess," he said. Malik's eyes finally lifted, meeting Porter's dead on. "The board is equal for everyone." A hush so deep fell over the guests that even the ticking of the grand clock above Eleanor's fireplace sounded like thunder. The stockbroker who'd laughed the loudest at the start now found his throat dry. The woman with the velvet hat pressed a napkin to her lips, eyes wide as if she'd just seen a ghost. And Eleanor, perched at her chaise lounge with her wine glass frozen halfway to her mouth, looked suddenly small in her own kingdom. Her manicured fingers twitched, but no clever quip came. She couldn't spin this into a charity story yet, not when the room knew they were watching something real, something she hadn't orchestrated. Porter stared at the chessboard, breathing heavily. He tugged at his queen like it might magically rescue him, but every angle was locked down tight. Malik's pawns, the humble, overlooked pieces, had become walls. His knights watched from a distance, ready to leap in for the kill if needed. Malik didn't even bother to look triumphant. He just shifted in his oversized velvet chair, his sneakers swinging slightly under the table. He placed his thumb on the worn cover of his chess manual, the same battered book his grandfather had scribbled notes in. It was a small, quiet gesture, but it made Olivia's throat tighten. That manual had been his torch in the dark corners of her double shifts, his way to dream when she'd had nothing to offer but love and old stories. Porter's king was cornered, nowhere left to run. Malik's final move was so simple, so clean, so inevitable that it made the gasps echo like applause in the cavernous study. "Checkmate in 3 moves," the boy repeated, exactly as he'd predicted at the start. His voice was calm, gentle, the way you might tell someone the truth they refused to see. The sound was a heartbeat silence, and then a collective inhale, a muffled gasp, a champagne glass tipped from someone's hand, shattering on the marble. No one even glanced at the spilled bubbles. Olivia clapped her hand to her mouth, tears brimming so fast she barely had time to blink them away. For years, she'd worked to make her son invisible, to protect him from sneers like Porter's, from smiles like Eleanor's. And now here he was, so visible that no one in that room could deny him again. She wanted to shout it, "That's my boy. That's my Malik." But she held the words in her throat like a prayer. Instead, she let her tears fall, her shoulders straightening inch by inch. Porter pushed back from the table, so hard his chair screeched across the marble floor. He looked around, wild-eyed, like he expected someone to rescue him from the humiliation curling hot around his ears. But no one moved. Not a soul stepped forward to pat his shoulder. No one offered him a polite excuse to save face. "Cheating. Must be cheating," he muttered, but his voice cracked. He jabbed a finger at Olivia like it was her fault, as if she'd slipped hidden tricks under her son's sleeves. Olivia didn't flinch. She didn't drop her eyes like she used to. She simply stepped forward and laid her hand gently on Malik's shoulder, a barrier and a blessing all in one. Porter's finger fell back to his side limp. With nothing left to say, no more laughter, no more bragging, Mr. Porter stormed out of the study, his shiny leather shoes squeaking in the silence he left behind. The double doors swung shut behind him like the final slam of a judge's gavel. For a moment, nobody spoke. The only sound was Malik's soft exhale as he packed up the marble pieces, careful not to chip them. More respect for the game than the man who'd lost it ever showed him. One of the guests, the older gentleman who'd watched in quiet awe, stepped forward at last. He cleared his throat, voice husky with something that sounded almost like hope. "Young man," he said, leaning down, "who taught you to think like that?" Malik looked up, his eyes drifting to his mother, who now stood tall beside him, no longer the maid in the shadows, but the mother of a child no one could belittle. He held up the battered chess manual, the corners bent from love and repetition. "My grandfather," he said simply, "and my mom." He glanced back at the marble board, its king still toppled in surrender. In that moment, everyone in the room felt it. This wasn't just a game. It was a checkmate that would echo far beyond Eleanor's fancy house, a reminder that the smallest piece, moved wisely, can topple a king. The guests circled Malik, now like moths drawn to a single flickering candle in the dark. 10 minutes ago, they wouldn't have given him a second glance. A kid with scuffed shoes and a chess book taped together at the spine. But now, they crowded close, leaning over the grand marble board as if they might catch the magic in his small hands. "How old are you?" A woman in a pearl necklace asked breathlessly, her voice trembling like she was meeting royalty. "Do you have a coach?" Another man blurted. His sunglasses were still perched on top of his slick-back hair, forgotten in his rush to be first in line. "Where'd you learn to play like that?" barked a man who'd spent the entire brunch bragging about his new Porsche. Malik's eyes flicked from one face to another. The bright chandelier overhead made him squint a little. He felt their questions buzzing around him like bees. Too many. Too fast. Part of him wanted to sink back into his chair, to crawl under the table and shut it all out. But then he felt a hand on his shoulder. Warm, gentle, steady. His mother's hand. And he remembered, the board is equal for everyone. He swallowed the tight knot in his throat and said, "I play online mostly. My grandpa taught me when I was little. My school doesn't have a chess club. Mom says it's expensive to travel for tournaments." There it was, the unvarnished truth that made the room shift uncomfortably. Wealth sat heavy on every gold-framed painting and every crystal flute in Eleanor's mansion. Yet the idea of a boy this brilliant being boxed in by money made the guests squirm, like children caught hoarding candy. An older woman in a silk hat fumbled with her purse, mumbling, "Someone should help him get to competitions. Such talent shouldn't be hidden away." But before anyone could answer, Eleanor's voice sliced through the chatter, high and bright and false. She stepped forward, heels clicking on the marble like the clack of a gavel in a courtroom she'd already decided she owned. Ahem. Eleanor cleared her throat dramatically, raising her wine glass, as if for a toast. The crowd parted for her like a tide. "Well," she said, her painted lips curving into a smile that Olivia knew far too well, the smile that said, "You owe me." Who knew Olivia was hiding a little prodigy in him? Eleanor said sweetly, glancing at the maid like she was a child caught stealing cookies. She reached out and patted Malik's head, careful not to muss her nails. "Perhaps we should sponsor a few tournaments for him. Wouldn't that be delightful?" A murmur of polite agreement rippled through the guests. They nodded, eyes darting from Eleanor to Olivia, waiting for the expected script. The grateful servant, the thankful tears, the bowing of the head. It was the story Eleanor always liked best, generosity that came with strings attached. But Olivia didn't flinch this time. She stood just behind Malik, her spine straight, her chin lifted a fraction higher than it had been in all her years scrubbing Eleanor's floors and setting her dinner parties just so. She met Eleanor's eyes with a quiet defiance that made Eleanor's smile flicker, just for a heartbeat, because Olivia knew that smile. She'd lived under it for years. It was the same smile Eleanor wore when she gifted the leftover cake from her galas to the kitchen staff, then told anyone who'd listen how good she was to those people. The same smile she wore when she lent Olivia $20 once, then brought it up every Christmas when the guests were tipsy enough to laugh at someone else's poverty. Malik felt his mother's fingers pressed gently on his shoulder, grounding him. He looked at Eleanor's hand still hovering near his hair, so delicate and fake, and then down at the chessboard, the real power, the equalizer. He didn't say thank you. He didn't say yes. He didn't say anything at all. Instead, Malik reached out and picked up his battered chess manual. The pages were yellowed from years of being turned and turned again by tiny fingers learning to think 5 moves ahead. The corners were taped, then retaped when the tape frayed from overuse. It was the one thing in that room that belonged completely to him, a gift from his grandfather, a promise from his mother. One of the guests, a young woman with a camera still slung around her neck, leaned closer, eyes wide with wonder. "Can I take your picture, Malik?" she asked gently, her tone so different from Eleanor's sharp sweetness. Malik nodded once, a shy smile ghosting across his lips for the first time all day. The flash popped, bright enough to catch Olivia's tearful grin, just behind him. The woman turned the camera around to show him. A tiny king in a borrowed chair, chessboard laid out like a battlefield he'd already conquered. Behind the camera, Eleanor's painted smile wobbled. She looked around at her guests, at the whispers starting to circle not about her house or her party, but about the boy, the maid's boy. She felt it slip, the power that had always come from being the one who gave out favors like breadcrumbs. Olivia caught Eleanor's eyes one last time. She didn't bow her head. She didn't rush forward to embrace her employer in front of the guests. She just placed her hand firmly on Malik's shoulder, a quiet promise that they'd find their own way, with or without Eleanor's name on it. Someone began to clap, hesitant at first, then louder, then joined by others. It wasn't for the party. It wasn't for Eleanor's generosity. It was for the boy who had turned their laughter into silence, their pity into awe, their charity into irrelevance. Malik didn't stand up on a chair and give a speech. He didn't tell them how they should feel. He just hugged his chess manual to his chest, holding tight to the only thing in that room that had never lied to him. Later, as the guests drifted away, still buzzing about the little genius they'd witnessed, Eleanor reached out as if to touch Olivia's arm. But Olivia stepped back, just an inch, enough for the message to land. "Thank you, ma'am," Olivia said softly, her voice even. "But I think we'll handle it ourselves." She turned, gathered Malik's bag, and led her son out of the grand study with its golden chessboard gleaming uselessly in the corner. Outside the mansion doors, the warm dusk felt different, honest, unpolished, and wide open. Malik slipped his hand into his mother's. He didn't look back at the people still peering through the windows. He didn't need to, because some victories don't need a sponsor's name carved in gold. Some victories live quietly in a battered chess book, a mother's steady hand, and the simple truth that, on the board and in life, the board is equal for everyone. Word about Malik spread far beyond Eleanor Grant's marble mansion. It started with a single video clip, shaky phone footage taken by a guest who'd come for free champagne and stayed for a checkmate that made him question everything he thought he knew about power. The video was barely 3 minutes long. A 10-year-old boy in a rumpled shirt, shoes dangling above an expensive carpet, moving pieces with the calm precision of a surgeon. In the background, you could see the millionaire's face going from smug amusement to dripping sweat to stunned humiliation. But what made the video explode wasn't just the moves. It was the soft, steady voice, the boy's whisper that felt like thunder. The board is equal for everyone. By morning, the clip had been shared across social media. Chess groups reposted it first, marveling at the boy's natural instinct. Parenting blogs picked it up, praising his mother's quiet sacrifice. Then came the local news. Local Maid's son checkmates millionaire at charity brunch. A headline that made people click, share, comment, and argue in the comment sections. Emails flooded in. Olivia didn't even own a laptop. She read the first offers off her cracked phone screen, her hand shaking so badly she almost dropped it on the bus ride home. There were messages from youth chess leagues asking if Malik could join their national teams. Community centers offered free coaching. A retired grandmaster from across the country offered to mentor him by video call. A scholarship fund director asked to meet with Olivia about securing Malik's future. And there were messages from strangers, too. People who saw something of themselves in a kid who dared to be brilliant where he wasn't supposed to be. A single mom from Detroit wrote, "Your son made me believe again that we don't have to stay in the corner they put us in." A young chess streamer donated his ad money to help Malik travel for his first tournament. Olivia read each message with her hand pressed to her heart, a heartbeat that, for the first time in years, didn't feel like it was racing just to survive. A week later, Malik found himself sitting in a squeaky chair at the local community center, across from a reporter with perfect hair and a microphone. Behind him stood Olivia, still wearing her work shoes, but with her shoulders pulled back and her chin lifted. It was a free interview slot, arranged by a community organizer who saw a story worth telling without the twist of charity strings. And yet, there was Eleanor, sitting just out of the camera's main frame, powder pink suit pressed, so crisp it looked starched onto her skin. Her lips curled in that same Showtime smile, waiting for her moment to jump in. When the reporter asked about Malik's game, Eleanor leaned forward and laughed lightly. "Oh, we're just so proud of him. Imagine, hidden talent in the help. It's like discovering a diamond in the rough, you know." But Malik had learned a lot more than chess that day in Eleanor's study. He'd learned what power looks like when it thinks you owe it your story. He'd learned how small people can act in big houses. So when the reporter turned to him and asked, "Malik, how do you feel about Eleanor's support?" the boy didn't flinch. He didn't look at Eleanor. He looked at his mother, the one who taught him how to win and lose with the same steady heart. Malik leaned into the microphone, voice clear. "My mom taught me more than chess," he said. The cameraman shifted for a better shot, catching the warmth in Olivia's eyes. "She taught me how to stay humble, even when people think you're nothing, and to always remember, the board is equal for everyone." A beat of silence. The reporter blinked, lips parted. Eleanor's smile flickered like a dying light bulb. And Olivia? She didn't need to say anything. She just laid her hand on Malik's shoulder, her soft, work-rough fingers the only crown her son needed. By that night, the clip of Malik's answer made the rounds online, just like the chess video had. People didn't care about Eleanor's parties or her charity brunches. They cared about the boy who saw the board for what it was, a place where kings and pawns could stand side by side if they learned to move wisely. More invitations came in. A youth league from out of state offered to cover all his travel costs for a national championship. A local coach dropped by their small apartment with a donated chess clock and a promise of lessons every Saturday, free of charge. Olivia politely declined the slick offers that smelled too much like Eleanor's smile, the ones that came with bragging rights attached. She knew now. Her son didn't need saving. He just needed space to play. And back at Eleanor's mansion, the big, fancy marble chessboard stayed exactly where it was, gleaming under its glass dome like a relic no one dared disturb anymore. The guests who'd once chuckled at its novelty now avoided it, as if the memory of Malik's final checkmate in 3 moves might be carved into the very pieces. Eleanor tried to tell the story her way. For a while, she bragged about how she'd discovered him, how her party had given him a chance. But the world didn't buy it. People saw the video. They saw the boy's calm face, his mother's unwavering love, the king cornered by the pawn no one expected. And they knew the truth. She hadn't made him. He'd made himself, with a tattered chess manual and a belief that a tiny piece could topple a giant when moved wisely. Sometimes Olivia still passed that big house on her way to work. Sometimes she glanced up at the grand windows, where Eleanor's new guests laughed and drank the same old wine. But inside her chest, where it once ached to be invisible, something new glowed warm, a quiet, defiant pride. Because in her small apartment, Malik sat at a folding table donated by the community center, his battered manual at his elbow, skimming chess puzzles by the soft light of a thrift store lamp. He'd never been more seen, not because of Eleanor's party, but because he dared to sit down at a board no one thought belonged to him. And out there, in the living room, Olivia sat with a cup of tea gone cold in her hand, listening to the faint click of chess pieces in the next room, a sound that reminded her, no matter how the world tries to stack the board, kings, pawns, queens, sometimes the smallest piece can end the game for good. Because for Malik, the game was never just about winning. It was about showing the world the board is equal for everyone,